If you've been around the Mount and Blade scene for quite some time, you will know about Persistent World. It started off as an open world modification for the Mount and Blade Warband game, and it was, well, mind-blowing. Spawning into this custom-made map, something unlike anything that Mount and Blade, especially its modders, had done. You go out into this world, people working on farms, chopping down trees, working in the mines, loading up horses and carts to be then taken to sell by the smithy that could then forge them into weapons and then make armor for the soldiers. There would be a higher ranking of lords and knights, all real people having their own clans, most of the time based off Game of Thrones when that was popular. Alliances and wars would be made, sieges would happen, and I think it was probably one of the most game-changing modifications for Mount and Blade, at least in my time. But there was a question. Would it ever come to Bannerlord? And whilst there was some whisperings in the work that it could potentially make an appearance in the new game, I think it's finally time to say, Persistent Empires is on its way, and we've had our first real bit of gameplay. Persistent Empires was actually announced way back, in the time where Bannerlord was just a whisper in the wind and nobody actually knew when it was coming out. They said, look, if this game does eventually come out, we'll make a modification for it. It is based on the Persistent World mod for Mount and Blade, and I'm assuming Persistent Kingdoms, which is a more recent Warband Persistent mod, providing similar crafting, farming, mining, hunting, and other MMO-esque roles, as well as the factions, classes, and warfare from Persistent World. There was actually a Persistent Empires mod in Mount and Blade Warband. As Persistent World got so big, there were so many spin-offs. We had, of course, the Persistent World open world mod that would give us the medieval Mount and Blade native experience, but in an open MMO-esque workaround. We then got Persistent Frontier, which was, well, going to the frontier of America. You could play as the Redcoats or, of course, the natives. It seems a little bit weird in this day and age, but it was still a lot of fun. You also had Persistent Sagas, the Viking version. I made so many videos on that, and it was a lot of fun. Once again, it was like Persistent World, but an open world with Vikings, and even now longships, doing raids, ship-to-ship combat, and even doing beach landings. And we got Persistent Empires, which was the Roman version. Now, there have been small spin-offs and variants like Feudal World that try to do a bit more and try and push that Persistent World mod, but it didn't quite succeed, or at least not in Warband. It will have a completely custom database which saves your gold, armor, weapons, and spawn positions. For example, if you log out, you're not going to lose any of your stuff, and you'll log back in at the exact same place. The database has allowed for the creation of a leveling system with new features such as diplomacy, server admin. Now, there was some slight parts of this in the original Persistent World mods for Mount and Blade. You could technically buy houses, but it wasn't all that used, and there was some sort of diplomacy features, but it wasn't really inbuilt to the game. My hope is that with Bannerlord and all the things that come with the new title, hopefully we're going to get a much more complex and much in-depth version of the open world mods that we got in Warband. We've already seen this so far. Bannerlord Online is one of the most successful mods, and even before we had any sort of custom servers, it was so populated. Thousands of players on one server playing Mount and Blade's campaign, but with other people. It was kind of the first MMO brought into Bannerlord itself, but this is going to be a more personal MMO. You're not going to be raising an army, you're going to be one person who can join an army full of other players. Spawning in, you're going to have the chance to explore for yourself, make some money, whether you're training as a bandit and making a group of highwaymen to tax roads or hide in ruins. I mean, that was actually my first experience with Persistent World, was joining the outlaws and looting, halting people and stealing their stuff. Guards would come and find us and we'd have to take them out or hide. Maybe you want to become a serf, have your own farmstead, raise cattle and butcher them. These are all things that are in the previous titles, and I don't see why they wouldn't be in this one, just on a more advanced level. Of course, everybody wants to be a knight, but there's not always the chances for that. You'd have to join a clan or make one of your own, having that ranking system, whether you're an archer, a footman, a cavalryman. But there's a lot of differences within this kind of mod that you wouldn't foresee, at least when you first join. You see, if you want to play as cavalry in regular Mount and Blades multiplayer, you play as cavalry. You get a horse and that's it. But with these persistent MMO kind of experiences, you need the money. You need to do the work for yourself or outsource that work. Get people and hire people to make money for you within this modification. Or if you're lucky, make good friends with the Lord who has access to the treasury and can buy pretty much whatever they want. Because yes, there is full tax systems as well. It is an incredibly in-depth mod, and Warband had so many players on it, and it was really where I got my start on YouTube, was making persistent world mods. This is where people actually started to watch the channel, so it probably wouldn't exist without it, and I'm so glad that it's coming to this game. We actually got recently a Persistent Empires building system demo on the Eren and Bambi YouTube channel. They seem to be the developers working on it at the moment. In here, a man walks into a custom house and becomes a craftsman for the Everasi team. Of course, this is how you did it in Warband. You select the tool you want to use, and that would correlate to a class. Hammer being craftsman, pitchfork being serf, sword being swordsman, so on and so forth. It would then switch you to whatever team it correlated with, and you'd get the skills and abilities. For example, if you had swordsman and you joined as a swordsman, it'd give you the attributes as a swordsman, much like you'd work up your attributes and skills within Bannerlord single player. Of course, here we can see there will be full building mechanics within the game itself. You have chests where you can move resources that you can start to build things, whether this is encampments, crafting stations, barracks, storage places, even archery ranges that then can be used by other people. It looks like there are siege towers within the background that will probably have to be built. This is something we saw in the original Persistent Worlds, having to build ladders when you go to siege, so you've got to make sure you take the resources to build a siege encampment. It does look like that as you do certain tasks, you can indeed level up your skills as well. What's more is there seems to be certain levels and tiers to the building system. The initial seems to be a tent and then going up to a bigger house, and eventually a full bit of beautiful stonework and masonry. This looks to be the private housing. We have some stables in the background, full forts that I'm assuming can be built, and ships, which is another interesting one. There will be ship-to-ship combat, ship-to-ship warfare, and exploring islands. This opens up so many more possibilities for how big the maps can get. And that brings me on to my next point. Mount and Blade Warband's Persistent World mod blew me away when I first spawned in. I couldn't quite fathom how someone had taken a regular multiplayer map and made it this big. They made it into an open world. But Bannerlord's going to be another level. You see, we've seen some of the custom map editors. If any of you have actually spawned into a world and tried to make a map yourself, you will know how big it can get. Even the most basic version is 10, 20 times bigger than Warband's ever was, and that's not even taken into account. Modding can push it even further. And that is when the true potential really comes in here. We could have open worlds with different regions, different biomes, different cities that can be traded between. Maybe even the potential of adding in NPCs that can take things from one place to another, or even fight alongside you like a captain mode, but within the MMO. I cannot wait for this. This is going to be something really special, and I will be following the development so far along the way, because this is Persistent Empires.